My friends, this summer for Black Library has definitely had a theme. It is the season of Cadia. Between the Minka-lesque omnibus, The Shadow of the Eighth, Robert Rath's The Fall of Cadia, and now Creed, Ashes of Cadia, there has not been a better time to learn about one of the most historic warrior societies in the Imperium. In Creed, Ashes of Cadia, we get a look at the scion of the famous Lord Castellan, his daughter, Ursula Creed. And although this character has already been introduced to the lore, we have not gotten a full narrative novel on her yet. In her debut novel, she's trying to find out the true fate of Cadia, along with that of her father. But the Imperium is not the only faction interested in that information, so let's break it down.
There is no peace amongst the stars, for in the grim, dark future, there is only war.
Creed, Ashes of Cadia by Dr. Jude Reed acts as a somewhat unofficial sequel to The Fall of Cadia by Robert Rath. The book opens with a relatively content Lord Castellan Ursula Creed, at this point using the last name Skouros. We are several decades from the fall of Cadia, and although the regiment is nowhere near where it used to be, and its people are scattered all over the galaxy, they still persist. Ursula Creed became the Lord Castellan of this wayward regiment through her own volition and her own merit. Despite being doubted by her fellow officers and seen as someone who got to her position by use of her name. Even at the beginning of this book, generals under her command constantly question her choices. After another successful by-the-book campaign, the Lord Castellan is summoned away from the front by the Lord Regent himself, Roboute Guilliman. Upon their first face-to-face meeting, Roboute Guilliman drops a bombshell on the Lord Castellan. A rogue trader under his command has found remnants of the planet of Cadia. Many people thought that the entire planet had been destroyed and that there were no pieces left, but this rogue trader found a sizable chunk of the planet, approximately 1/20th of it, that still had activity on the surface. Not only have they found remnants of the planet, but they also have evidence that the Lord Castellan Ursula Creed left some type of special weapon or equipment in a vault on that same piece of the planet. And this information has opened up a couple of possibilities and opportunities for the Astra Militarum. First and foremost is of course a new weapon to fight against chaos with. And secondly, as the Indomitus Crusade grinds on, a morale boost is needed, and this is a perfect opportunity to create propaganda. What is a better picture than the daughter of the Lord Castellan Ursula Creed returning to the remnants of Cadia and conquering it? Now this focus on creating pieces of propaganda has implications further in the novel. The biggest one being the diverse squad that is given to the Lord Castellan for her mission. This is where we get our wide variety of characters. The propagandists want to show the different generations of Cadia fighting for their collective future. In this squad, we have Major Gideon Argent, the Lord Castellan's adjutant and longtime friend. There's Colonel Hadrian Van Host, a colonel of hussars and previously a part of one of the oldest families on Cadia. Sergeant Major Dominic Strahl served under the first Lord Castellan and was there during the fall of Cadia. There are transplants from other regiments who were brought into the Cadian ranks to bolster the numbers of this regiment. And one of those transplants is a part of the squad. The suspiciously talented Sergeant Vanatu Harappa used to be a part of the Catachan Jungle Fighters. And the group is rounded out by a couple of fresh troopers who have never set foot on Cadia. Troopers Shael Askari and Lane Anka. With the Lord Castellan's group prepared and being backed up by a couple of squads of Tempestus Scions, they touch down on the remnants of Cadia. And of course, this is when everything goes wrong. The propagandist plan was very simple. They would triumphantly land on Cadia and go and retrieve whatever was in Ursula Creed's vault, basically without issue. They would use a penal legion to distract the main forces of chaos on Cadia while they snuck to the vault and retrieved whatever was in there. But the problem with any Astra Militarum plan is that reality rarely goes along with the plan. Immediately the group is beset on all sides by poxwalkers. An army of the dead assail them and the Tempestus Scions are almost all taken out. Cadia, because it has been so close to the warp and occupied by chaos forces, has become corrupted itself. On top of it beginning to rain blood, the gunship sent from orbit to pick them up is shot down. And this is where we get a good look at the main antagonist of this story. Livor Opilianus is a Death Guard Plague Marine as well as a sorcerer of Nurgle. Along with many other Chaos factions that are on the remnants of Cadia, he's there to stake a claim on this planet. He spends a majority of the novel hunting for Ursula Creed, wanting to use her blood to achieve his own apotheosis. After driving off the Huntsman, the reborn Cadian 8th Regiment, which the propagandists have dubbed this new squad, run into a couple of penal legionaries. Mac Ossian, a former Cadian trooper turned murderer, along with Liga Jaeger and their Ogren friend Clavey, survived their gunship crashing and ran into the Lord Castellan squad. After an unfortunate friendly fire incident that saw Clavey killed, the entire group sets off for Creed's bunker. What follows is an incredible amount of narrative tension and extreme highs and lows. The bunker that they thought was Creed's ends up being a prison for a demon that they unintentionally let loose. An incredibly disappointing and crushing morale blow that is swiftly replaced by intense curiosity as they observe people on the surface of Cadia that don't seem to be Chaos cultists. The suspicion that other Imperial forces, maybe even people who survived the fall being on Cadia, is confirmed when they reach the next possible location for Creed's bunker. The squad is rescued from a huge army of dead by the 12th Cadian Sappers. This group, affectionately known as the Mole Rats, was charged by the Lord Castellan Ursula Creed to protect his vault. They were not to open it and were to guard it with their lives until his successor came. And this is one of the crazier revelations of this novel. These people have been living on the remnants of Cadia for decades. There are even a couple of children there who were born after the fall. Unfortunately though, their numbers were dwindling as the corruption of Cadia seeped into their own physical bodies. But they did follow their orders and Creed's vault is intact. In this vault is where the prize of the entire mission is held. Instead of some massive, highly advanced piece of weaponry or some other specialized equipment, there's simply a data crystal, a desk, and a seat. A hololithic message from the Lord Castellan Ursula Creed plays, and it is specifically for Ursula. First, he acknowledges her as his daughter. And this is a huge moment for her character, as she has tried to separate herself from the Creed image and legacy her entire life. Ursula felt as though her father ignored her entire life, and to have the realization that he actually did care about her and followed her career was incredibly sobering. But the second part of the message was even more important and concerned the data crystal. On this crystal was Creed's plan for a new Cadia. Although Ursula Creed had a lot of flaws, he did have a sufficient amount of foresight, and he knew the planet of Cadia would at some point be destroyed. So he made a list of habitable planets that had not been claimed in order to find a new homeworld for his people. To Ursula and the rest of the Cadians who have been struggling to find an identity since the fall, this is a prize worth thousands of times more than a simple weapon. Once they get this piece of information, it is a mad race to escape the planet. They are relentlessly pursued by the Huntsman, who is still looking for Creed's blood. Troopers are bitten or otherwise infected, and they have to look at the moral consequences of dealing with that problem. And above all, the theme of the last couple of acts is betrayal. Colonel Van Host, who has been a pompous, prickly presence the entire time, tricks them into going to his family's estate, leading the group to believe that there was advanced Vox equipment there that they could call for help with. He actually went to check on the fate of his husband and his children. After this devastating revelation, Ursula Creed is attacked and knocked out, and the data crystal that was left to her by her father is stolen. Mac Ossian, who somewhat earned the group's trust by being their Medicae and becoming close with the Lord Castellan, is presumed to have left them and betrayed that trust. Though later it's revealed he was temporarily kidnapped by the Huntsman. And even at the end, after they have defeated the Huntsman who was about to achieve apotheosis, Ursula is betrayed by her adjutant, Major Gideon Argent. Having lived for decades in the shadows of the Lord Castellan, he wants some of the glory for himself. He thought to steal the data crystal and kill the Lord Castellan so that he could be the savior of Cadia. But karma almost immediately catches up with him, and he's killed by Lascari and the Lord Castellan. The book ends on a much lighter note than I would have expected from a story like this. Although Rubute Gilliman did not give explicit permission to the Lord Castellan to go and find a new homeworld for Cadia, he didn't say no either. The story and narrative of Creed Ashes of Cadia is very good, and it's very character heavy. And there is no more prominent character in this book than Ursula Creed. She's an incredibly complex character surrounded in a whirlwind of contradictions and parallels. She's constantly trying to balance escaping her father's shadow while simultaneously being compared to him along every step of the way. But whether she likes it or not, she is very similar to the previous Lord Castellan. Just how her father was doubted every step of the way during the fall of Cadia, so is she doubted by everyone under her command. Though the main source of doubt for her father's detractors was his low birth, conversely her critics accuse her of nepotism and using the Creed name to get ahead. On a more micro level, she has a similar presence to her father. She's even at a similar point in her life as her father was when he led the defense of Cadia. Honestly, the biggest difference between them is the fact that Color Sergeant Jaren Kell would never betray Lord Castellan Creed. Now, there were a lot of other really interesting characters in the reborn Cadian 8th, but I don't think any of them had the same effect on me or even had a more interesting story than Mac Ossian. He was an unexpected secondary character that quickly became one of my favorites. Through him, you also get to experience what it's like to be a penal legionnaire. But I think his greatest contribution as a character was being an unexpected source of group conscience and morality. Being a penal legionnaire, he's marked with a certain perception even though he was a former Cadian trooper. And there are definitely some parallels there between him and how we treat convicts in our society today. So when these very important people meet Mac Ossian and he's a well-educated, likable surgeon on top of being a penal legionnaire, their perceptions and their biases are challenged. And the last character I want to highlight is Trooper Shaya Laskari. To me, she was a character that really represented the entire younger generation of Cadia. White Shields who have never stepped foot on the planet but are just as dedicated to protecting their people and their culture. One smaller thing about her character that I really enjoyed was being shown how propagandized the younger generation of the Imperium still is. When they first fight against the Huntsmen, she doesn't even believe that heretic Astartes even exist. In her mind, due to the Imperium's propaganda machine, Space Marines are built up so much that they are incorruptible to her. It gives a very interesting shade to Gilliman's Imperium and how far they still have to go. Let's talk about some of the things that this book did really well. First and foremost to me is the added romance that's in this book. As Ursula Creed and Mac Ossian get more familiar, there is a romantic tension there. One that really adds to their characters but doesn't distract away from the story. It even comes to a head near the end when they think they're going to die and Ursula kisses him. And let me tell you, as someone who reads almost 2 Warhammer books a week, there is a serious lack of romance in these novels. I understand that Space Marines, who are the main characters of most books, are asexual and aromantic, but it's nice to see another human relationship that includes romance. Another thing this book did really well was that Dr. Jude Reed really did play to her strengths. Not only is she a practicing surgeon, but she also worked on the Warhammer video game Darktide. And she really brought both of those areas of expertise into one character with Mac Ossian. In Darktide, you play a penal legionnaire who goes out on missions fighting against chaos. And Mac Ossian is an incredibly skilled chirurgeon, even doing a field amputation at gunpoint. And I think that's really what made his character feel fleshed out. Lastly, I think this book did a fantastic job at wrapping up the Cadia story. The fall of Cadia originally happened at the end of 7th edition, and it has been years that we have been focusing on this event. And understandably so, it is a catalyst for the Indomitus Crusade and Robute Guilliman's return. But this narrative felt like it was answering a lot of questions we had about Cadia. We now know what happened to the planet, we now know that it is corrupted beyond redemption. But we now have the material to launch into a whole new Cadia story. What planet are they going to choose as their homeworld? And someone in that galaxy is going to have a problem with where they settle. Now, whether those enemies are going to be internal or external remains to be seen. Now for the things that I didn't like. Now there's not a lot of them, it's really only the antagonist. Which sounds big, but there's so much good in this book that it really does overshadow what I think is a kind of lackluster enemy. We get so many diverse Imperial stories and points of view, but we only get really one kind of narrow enemy view. And maybe it's because I've been reading the Dark Imperium trilogy and the last book in the Dawn of Fire novel series, which all feature Plague Marines as the main antagonists. But to me, Livor Opilianus is kind of a boring Death Guard. One of my favorite things about Nurgle Cultist and his followers is the fact that they integrate the theme of death and plague very well into their characters. Like Ulgrath the Destroyer, who during the Great Crusade worked with atomic weaponry, and who now as a Plague Marine is entirely themed as the destruction of radiation. That was a lot of words to say that I think there are cooler Death Guard out there. The only other thing I didn't like about this book is the fact that I am so tired of Nurgle forces still being the main antagonist in Warhammer books and Warhammer games. I could use some more variety when it comes to chaos. The Tale of Ursula Creed is a very solid homecoming story, so there was really only a couple of things that surprised me while I was reading. The first is the fact that there is an actual plan for Cadia. The way Cadians have been written recently made me think that they were resigned to being a homeless, fleet-based regiment. For a long time after the fall of Cadia, they were in limbo as far as their story was concerned. So it's a pleasant surprise that there is a way forward for the society. The only other surprise was the slight retcon to the circumstances that brought Ursula Creed her father's jacket. In the 9th edition Astra Militarum Codex, it is briefly mentioned that the jacket of Ursula Creed randomly shows up in Ursula's quarters one day, and it's widely believed that it's Trazyn the Infinite who gave this jacket to his daughter. The only part of the retcon in here was when that happened. In the 9th edition Codex, it happened a few months after the fall of Cadia, and in this book she gets the jacket upon return from her mission. Nothing too crazy, and it doesn't really change the story that much, but I thought that was interesting. I said this in the review for The Fall of Cadia, and I will say it again here. These last few books that have come out about the Astra Militarum have made me want to read more about the Guard. Human stories are automatically going to be more relatable than transhuman ones. And Dr. Jude Reed does a fantastic job of not only pushing the story forward, but fleshing out beloved characters as well. Overall, I really enjoyed this book. I would recommend it to anybody who is interested in learning about Cadia, who is a Cadia fan already, or even a fan of just the Creed family. Thank you guys for watching. I'm on Goodreads if you want to see the rating for this book. Leave a like, a comment, and hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you guys in the next one.